I'm a part-time professor teaching topics related to Chesapeake Bay and Salisbury's Environmental Studies Department. I sort of come at the Bay mainly as a longtime journalist and author, as a writer. Started in 1972 and still doing a little bit. Also, just as someone who's spent most of his life enjoying the Chesapeake, worrying about it, traveling around it, kayaking, biking, so forth. So I'm going to just let Bill and Rich introduce themselves now.
Tom left out the fact that he's also a filmmaker and got a new film coming out very shortly, and probably knows more about the Bay than all of us put together. So Bill Dennison, I'm at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. I have a role at the Bay Program, and that I'm on the Science and Technical Advisory Committee, and I also chair the Science and Technical Assessment Reporting Committee. One of my claims to fame is when they decided to set up this science panel to help the Bay, they wanted to call it the Technical and Science Support, TSS, which is in our world is dirt. That's suspended sediments in the water. So I don't want it to be dirt. I want it to be a star. So I came up with Science and Technical Assessment and Reporting. So everybody else has their little name plaques, and it's Gold Team 1, Gold Team 2, Bill Dennison Star. So that's what I contribute to the Bay Program. My science background is in seagrasses, and I started working with Rich on seagrass water quality in the 80s. Then I got sick of Rich, and I moved to Australia to be far, far away. Spent 10 years down there, and then made the mistake of coming back. And really, the best part about, I've seen Chesapeake Bay from inside and outside. And when you look at it from outside, the Chesapeake Bay is the big kahuna. This is what everybody emulates. This is what everybody looks to for leadership. And sometimes that's great. We're the best. Sometimes it's like, oh God, we're the best. So it's both an honor and a privilege and a challenge to live up to the expectations that we're going to lead the world in estuarine science and management, and ultimately, I wouldn't call it restoration, but ultimately reconfiguring the Bay for the future.
So for 10 years, here's my life when Bill was in Australia. Bill, Rich Batiuk here. I know it's 10 o'clock p.m. on your side.
Don't
Bill,
leave.
I've left at least 17 voicemail messages. Can you give me a call back? Nothing. And then bring, Rich, I need a letter of support here. We're doing you know how it works. So 10 years later, he comes back. He makes it. And where is Rich? Rich is actually was asked to be part of a faculty review to hire Bill's position. And I thought, here's the opportunity to pay him back. First question was, how long does it take you to respond back to voicemails from your associates that are working in management agencies? He failed that question, but the other people had no clue about it. So I hired him anyway, or we got you anyway. But then the burden happened for another 20 years and stuff. So share the burden with me, guys and gals. Appreciate it. So I've been actually retired for 5 years. So retirement is when you wake up in the morning and it's Saturday. It happens to be a Monday, a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but it's Saturday. So I'm here working on a Saturday, which is really great. So I know Walt Boynton mentioned Jacques Cousteau, who as a kid was one of my heroes. So I bugged the heck out of my two older sisters. By junior high school, I know exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be Jacques Cousteau, but I wanted to be in the shallows. I didn't want to have scuba gear on. I wanted just a snorkel, but I wanted to work in that area. And then I knew I wanted to work in the Chesapeake because it had these huge amounts of shallows. And I wanted to be like, I just forgot her name, Rachel Carson, because she was working on Silent Spring. So I read that when I remember on a Maine vacation. And I thought, that's great. And then I read the book Chesapeake. I said, fantastic, what a place to be. And so I worked, to get down here, did my graduate work at American University on seagrasses, where I met this guy. And I got an internship, as you heard earlier, with EPA. And then, God forbid, okay, so you've got an internship with EPA. You're in an office that's right on the Annapolis waterfront. the slips on there are more expensive than your mortgage payments, but it's great because you can, you see what you're trying to do, but you're in the office on Thursday and everybody's going out sailing and you still have 2 more budget meetings and you have to work on Friday and etc. It was a tough way to do it. And then Carroll's Creek Restaurant was right across the parking lot. It's good food and stuff like that. So I decided, hey, I'm going to stay. 34 years later, I retired. Somebody said, Rich, you're too young to retire. I got out at 56. I'm thinking, what's wrong with you all? 34 years, usually 60-plus hour weeks and stuff like that. But I had an entire, I had a career that had to deal with these guys. But just about every day I got up and was passionate about what we did. So what the opportunity is, and then when I came in the watershed, 12 million people. When I retired, 19 million people. Not just a single lifetime, but a single career. That population went over 50%. That footprint was huge. Then I watched the trends that we see out there. Yeah, you can complain about how we've done, but my God, folks, if we had a chance to look at that, whether it's air pollution, water pollution, or even holding the line and reducing somewhat on farms and stuff like that, you actually got to see the monitoring data that showed the systems coming back there as well. So I know we're going to talk about that as well, but we have made a difference. There are other factors out there that you can't do that. When I retired, I teamed up with a colleague of mine down in Tampa Bay. She was retiring at the same time. She directed the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. We got together. We put a small LLC together. And what we ended up doing is our business plan is we work for good food. In other words, you pay our travel, we'll come work for you. Well, folks, it got me to Auckland, New Zealand. It got me to Spain. I was over in China. I'm doing work in Puget Sound, Long Island Sound right now, and Lake Erie. Haven't earned a dime, but it's been fantastic working with about 80 different partnerships, organizations, and agencies. I'm not a smart guy, but what I brought with my partner is how do good partnerships work? What are some of the key things that allow people to do some stuff out there as well? Not only from our own partnerships, but from working with others around the world as well. So it's a great gig. We're still in our 5th year, and people keep calling us, keep wondering what the heck's going on there. But when you can spend 2 years working in Puerto Rico, free of charge, not a bad gig. But there is still a burden. I have to still deal with Dennison even in retirement, so feel sorry a little bit for me as well.
You said you weren't a smart guy, but it sounds like you got a pretty good gig out of that.
And
Absolutely.
remind me, before this hour and a half is out, I do want to come back to that subject of putting the Chesapeake in some perspective. How does it compare to other coastal water bodies, water quality wise, and in what we're doing? I used to bill us as world leaders. Lately, not so much. But anyway, I thought it might be interesting to kick this off to sort of bracket this afternoon with a couple things. One, I dug out the first modern conference I know of on Chesapeake Bay, the Governor's Conference of 1968. It was Governor apostrophe S. Maryland did not invite Virginia. Spiro Agnew was a governor. It was Pennsylvania. We didn't even think of the watershed back in 68. I mean, we knew about it, but we didn't think about it. Water quality back then, according to this conclusions of this 1968 conference, was pretty good. And I'm not too surprised because it hadn't rained a lot in the whole watershed from sometime in the 50s through what would be 1972. So not a lot of runoff. The bay was probably looking pretty good then. They did end this conference document, which is a few hundred pages, with a few questions. They said they thought going forward from 1968 would be really critical to the bay's future health to answer. How many acres of wetlands should we preserve? Well, if you heard Mark Lukenbach this morning, that's one we did kind of answer. No net loss, pretty much. How many people do we wish to house on the shores of the bay? Well, not so much of an answer there, except the more the merrier, apparently. Population has more than doubled in my lifetime, and we add about 1.5 million people a decade to the watershed. How many tons of food do we wish to harvest, and what kinds? That's something we could spend several days on. Been some notable successes with crabs and striped bass. Beginning maybe to do some right things with managing oysters, shad, menhaden, not so much. Final question was interesting. How big a ship do we wish to accommodate? What they were talking about was dredging. That's actually an area that's kind of a bright area now. We probably dredge more than we did in '68, but we're using it instead of throwing it overboard. We're using it to build substantial wildlife islands like 2,000-acre Poplar Island off Tillman, and the next one going down the bay is James Island. So a mix, how we responded. The other bookend, which I hope we'll get into toward the end of our presentation, is a little different. Book that many of us know, Jerry Schubel, came out with in 2021, The Future Chesapeake. Jerry is a scientist with long experience in the Chesapeake, Boston Harbor, Long Island Sound, and more recently, San Diego. Pretty provocative thesis. I'm going to paraphrase his entire book here in about 5 sentences. Forget restoration. It is fine for old cars, not so much for living ecosystems like the Chesapeake. The twin headwinds of climate change and an ever-expanding population mean we'll just keep missing deadlines if we keep narrowly doubling down on reducing nutrients and reducing dead zones. The Bay is what sociologists have called a wicked problem, so complex there is no solution, no cure, only the hope of containment, learning to live with it as best we can. I zoomed Jerry into the last class I taught last year, and he got the students thinking. He said toward the end, he said, okay, if you buy into my premise that restoration is not in our future, think and tell me what are things going forward that you really, really like about the Chesapeake, that if at all possible, you would like to move into the rest of this century intact. And ask you to be thinking about that, and maybe you can come out with some things. And our august group here will tell you it'll happen, it won't happen, right? You know. So with that, I think it might be useful to start with you guys about what is the Chesapeake? What makes it so special, and also in some cases so exquisitely vulnerable? Also pretty damn tough, as estuaries are. But if you would want to start with addressing that, I'd be interested.
I'll start. One of the things that, Tom, you did very eloquently in your Turning the Tide was talked about how shallow the bay is, how Walter Boynton called it skinny. You know, it's a lot of water, but it's spread out and pretty shallow. The other aspect that we kind of overlook, it's edgy. There's a lot of edges in the bay. If you take a piece of string and did it around the whole of the bay, that string would reach from San Diego to Seattle. It'd be the entire west coast of the United States. Just a lot of edges, and those edges are really important. And so we recently released a report with the Science and Technical Advisory Committee. We call it CSER, the Comprehensive Ecosystem Response Evaluation of System Response. Thanks, Alex. We just call it CSER. But it was really about, let's not focus so much on that deep trench dissolved oxygen. Let's get to where the people are, where the action is in terms of responsiveness. Let's get to the edges and those shallow transition zones. And the problem is, when you drive a boat, you can only go into water till it gets too shallow. When you drive a car, you can only go to where it stays dry. There's that in between where your feet are wet and it's really shallow, the marshy, and that, but so it's not easy to monitor. It's not easy to do research in that area, but it's really important. It's where the biogeochemical cycling takes place. It's very productive, and it's close to because the edges are so prolific. There are a lot of people that live close to that, so we think that edges are really important. Another aspect of the bay is that it's naturally nutrient retentive. It has a series of mechanisms. Actually, Mike Roman, who was on the panel this morning, wrote a paper with his colleagues, with physical oceanographers and biological oceanographers, describing 6 different processes that the estuarine turbidity maximum and the gyre that's in the bay and the riverfronts, all of which serve to keep the nutrients in the bay, which makes it so productive for secondary production for every phytoplankton, every photosynthetic organism that's produced. The bay produces an inordinate amount of shellfish and finfish because the nutrients aren't going out to the ocean, they're processed within the bay. That's a great thing for the bay, being nutrient intensive. It's the vulnerability of the bay, because when you add more nutrients to that, if they don't go out, they get entrained, and then we get harmful algal blooms and other bad things.
Worked real good when the watershed was forested and you had umpteen million beavers and ponds and dams, and it retained everything on
Took
the
20
land.
minutes for
Yeah.
Tom to bring up beavers. I had
well,
a little
I-
bet going on. It came out pretty quick.
Okay, could be worse. I could bring up population.
But you talked
Go
about
ahead.
the watershed. If you look worldwide, I think the Chesapeake's got the largest ratio of watershed to area. In other words, 15 times the size of the surface water is the watershed itself. So you've got this small body of water.
By the way, no, that's not quite. That's not the record. What's relevant is the volume of water, not the area
Gotcha.
of water.
Thank
It's
you.
not the area ratio. It's the fact that we have a big watershed for skinny water.
So it took 21 minutes for him to correct me, but we'll do that. So one beaver and one correction there. Anyways, the relative scale. So you've got this huge watershed you've got to do that's going into the skinny body of water. But as Bill said too, look at if you look at Delaware Bay, you look at Tampa Bay. It's this long, the shoreline that doesn't go in there. We've got all these indentations.
Yeah.
The other thing is we've got thousands and thousands of creeks and streams and rivers. I think Pennsylvania, compared to Alaska, it's got the most stream miles in the United States. You think, wait a second here, doesn't it folks out west? No. So we've got this dendritic stream system from those states that people are connected to water. Not everybody's got a connection to the Chesapeake, but it's those interconnections as well, way out into there as well. But how it's set up as well. You look at Maryland, almost 90% of the state is in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. You look at New York, only about 3 or 4% of their state is into the Chesapeake Bay watershed. They're the headwaters. So having driven across there, it takes about 5.5 hours to get up to Cortland County up in New York. To get out into West Virginia, I can go another 4 hours and still be in the Shenandoahs, etc. To get to Virginia Tech, who would ever want to go down there, right? It takes about 5 hours on that other side. So it's a big watershed, but you got to keep people connected to it. And not everybody likes crabs, oysters, rockfish, underwater grasses, but they're somewhere in that watershed when you have 19 million people. So it's both a curse and a blessing. It's a productive system, but overproductive. But I will tell you, in my career, I've seen Mother Nature do some natural scenarios. In other words, she's had extreme droughts, and essentially the Chesapeake saw about the nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment we think we need to get to. Within a year, she was responding. And the next year was a 100-year storm and screwed us all up there as well. So she is responsive, but she said that, and she is resilient, but you need to take a huge amount of that pressure off that particular system. So I think there is hope that you can get there. Climate change, that might be something completely that we never expected that adds it on there. But it is a system that does respond, even given the nature of it being retaining those nutrients.
It's actually a kind of a tough system. I mean, estuaries are pretty violent places to live if you're a critter. I remember Schubel once wrote that the chow's good if you can stand the hassle, is what he said,
Oh,
which was a
absolutely.
good way to put it about something trying to make a living in an estuary. Could you talk a little bit about the dynamic kind of variations that you see?
You look at temperature, salinity, depth, all those things in between there, and the fact that we humans like to change those as well. I think a wet year versus a dry year. You can't stay stationary like in the Magathie or you go down the Potomac. That system just over a season is changing. And our patterns of prey versus the food species and who's going to eat me and stuff changes over there as well. So you're right. Whether you're somebody sessile like an oyster, at least part of its life cycle, or a crab that has to take a trip out into the ocean and come back in there and catch the right current coming up into the Chesapeake and then be placed there, not eat, and then survive that next piece. You're right. It is a tough situation to live in.
Yeah.
And if you just give it a little love, it's amazing how fast things come back. Susquehanna Flats, up at the top of the bay, at the mouth of the mighty Susquehanna River. 50% of the freshwater flow comes right through there. And I mean, the resurgence of grasses up there is unbelievable. If you ever get a chance, it's like being in Florida Bay. The water is crystal clear. The grass is 2 to 3 meters high with thick as jungle, and fish and crabs are abundant, and all the watermen are on the edges catching anything coming out. And so, and yet, not that long ago, that was a desert. There was nothing there. So the nutrient diet, the total maximum daily load, starting to work. And when you see that kind of thing come back, you get these positive feedbacks. You can get a really great story coming out of it.
And then you go down to the other end of the bay where you've got mostly eelgrass, and that's a different story, I think.
Getting cooked. Yep, that's near the end of its geographic distribution, and we're burning it out. So not much future for that particular species.
But Tom, one of the key things is, and one of the reasons that drove me down here, not only the scientific community, but the ability to bring 6 states and the District of Columbia together, we started off by putting a monitoring program in place. We wouldn't be able to see those decadal scales. We're now almost 50-year record if you go back in terms of seagrasses, 40-plus year record of water quality. You can see, people say, oh, it's sunspots, it's Mars, it's Venus. No, you understand it against this human population and the changes in that system. That's one of the smartest things that we've done. And I still travel the country and travel the world. People say, I can't afford monitoring. And I tell them, how in the hell can't you not afford monitoring? Both from a management context and from a research context.
And that's the easiest thing to cut out of the budget, because the next year it doesn't make much, like not planting trees for a while in the city park. Mm-hmm. For a while, no one notices.
Yep.
Except then you got a data gap.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I beat the drums I like writing about things that are uninteresting. It's kind of a challenge. Every now and then you can make somebody interested. But monitoring, because the estuary is so dynamic, a 1-year snapshot or even a decadal snapshot may give you a totally misleading picture. Maybe it didn't rain that decade.
Yeah, I always love my USGS colleagues. Sorry, Peter, but they had this term 100-year storms, and I thought, God, I'm getting old. By my 10th year, I'd gone through 300 or 400-year storms. I'm thinking, he's old. He's even older. Heck, he was around back when the waters. Oh, that was the Red Sea, not the. We'll get that one right. But seriously, so you look at the system. You get the opportunity to understand what's happening out there.
Yeah. What during your long tenure with the Chesapeake Bay Program, what are the things that they got right? What did they do well? Obviously, we didn't do everything well. Obviously, the Bay Program itself can't be responsible for the whole bay.
Yeah, I could spend a half a day on the faults, but let me focus. I'm a half full person. What we got right was partnership. What we got right was actually trying to develop a system of collaborative decision making. What we got right was the importance of political agreements to go between local to state to federal changes in administration. What we got right was having a set of goals that you didn't need a PhD to explain to your neighbor or to explain to folks out there. Heck, you didn't even need to dumb it down when you're talking to congressmen and congresswomen out there. Sorry. But we got that connection right. So people knew when I was in West Virginia or I was down in Tidewater, Virginia, they understood that there's clean water and this connection here, the importance of doing that. Those pieces we got right. We got right to stay, build a foundation and continue to focus on the scientific side. The Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee was actually there before I came on, was one of the most important elements of that in the interaction with people like Mark and others, and you heard Walter and Mike and others. That connection between the scientific community and the management community continued to be so important doing that. It was always going based on making that happen. It was also that we were transparent. We learned our lesson early on that you can't talk about modeling results in place of monitoring results, but being accountable back to the public and to understand that accountability actually helps you make better decisions by doing so. So I think those are the key things I think we did right in order to move forward.
Well, let me push you a little on that. EPA was born out of a need to have a federal oversight to level the playing field environmentally across a very complicated landscape, the whole United States. I guess looking back, I always wished EPA had been stronger in that role on the Chesapeake, because Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, very different political calculations there, very different engagements. Even, and Mark, I'd be interested in your view. I always felt Marylanders were more bay-oriented than Virginians because of the scope of the bay down here. You're more river-oriented. Do you think that's right?
I think, well, yes, well, our fisheries really took place largely in the rivers. Even the ones that you put in the bay, they were tied to a river, the river mouth. And sort of, now some folks will move between rivers, but for the most part, they fish those rivers. The bays, there's some deep spots in the bay down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true in terms of it was certainly true in terms of the use of the bay for fisheries, for
Yeah.
recreation even. It was the rivers, the lower parts of the rivers, population center.
Yeah, because you get down there below Tangier Island, it's just big water all the way
It's
to,
wide
yeah.
open and it's a different vessel.
Yeah.
Tom, getting back to your question, so I was in a meeting, this was around 2007, before the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, sitting down with one of the cabinet secretaries down in Virginia, and I was with one of my EPA senior managers, and he turned to us and said, "You're never going to hear me say this in a public forum, but I want you to hold us accountable. I want you to look at Virginia, I want you to look at Pennsylvania, all the states, etc., and be very vocal about it, because you are going to cause me the ability to go back to my General Assembly, the ability to go back to home builders and municipal authorities and say, I've got to do this." Unfortunately, EPA, we tripped up on it, we built it in there, we were going to do a whole different approach to the TMDL. We had it written in there, all 7 states agreed to it. Unprecedented out there. Both Republican and Democratic administrations, particularly at the regional administrator level, didn't hold out what EPA promised to happen. Not that there would have been a complete difference, but it would have leveled the playing field and put the pressure where it needed to be.
Yeah.
We failed. My agency failed in that regard. Absolutely.
What do you think have been the most, your time spent with the Bay, the most important things, or the most notable things, good and bad? I mean, opportunities missed and things we got right.
I think one of the things that we were slow to pick up on is our focus was on the bay as a whole, and nobody owns that. Nobody cares about the bay. They care about the tributary, the creek, the bit of the bay that they touch, and of course in the watershed to connect all those streams. Maryland's the only state in the country that doesn't have a natural lake, because it's all streams and creeks that feed in the Chesapeake or the coastal bays. So it's quite unique, and so everybody is. I mean, you can walk 10 minutes from anywhere in this watershed, and you'll hit a body of water that'll reach the bay.
In some cities, it's been buried, but you're walking over it.
You're walking on top of it. Yeah.
He's right.
So we really are intimately connected, but we didn't make that connection early enough and hard enough. I think that's, the focus on the bay leaves people in Pennsylvania and New York, who cares for them? And I think it's really about the quality of life that everybody lives in the watershed, and that's we're onto it now, but we wasted time in getting there. That's I think a problem. Another part of this, I think, the things that we've learned scientifically is that this is it's. I could tell a little story about Peter Tango on this. We thought we know this bay better than anywhere in the world. This is the best studied bay estuary in the world. We really have more research institutions, more theses, masters and dissertations. We have more scientific papers, conferences, societies. We've done the science of the bay, so we're pretty good. Let's start forecasting. So we started forecasting our dissolved oxygen in the spring. What's going to be like? Well, we learned that we had to do that twice because weather would change it. So now we do it twice. Oh, but we can also forecast submerged aquatic vegetation, our grasses. Well, then we thought we can also forecast our harmful algal blooms. We had these regular harmful algal blooms. Peter was leading that charge. We could have flipped a coin and gotten better results in forecasting the grasses and the blooms. That's why we don't do it anymore. We don't know that much about it in the end. That's really what I've come to take. When I did my postdoc up in Stony Brook at Long Island, we discovered this brown tide. And I got a New York Times reporter came and spent a whole day on the boat with me, and we went and showed him all the brown tide and the clams and the scallops that were dying and the grass that was getting shaded out. And at the end of the day, I spent a whole day blabbing away. What did he take as the takeaway? The headline: "We know so little about the ocean," Dr. Bill Dennison. My colleagues said, "Well, you might not know much, but we do." And my family is like, "What have you been doing in school your whole life? Seriously?" But the grain of truth to that is that as much as sophisticated as we are in understanding, documenting what's going on, we don't have much predictive capacity. We're not really understand it well enough to really get ahead of the game and understand where it's going. So one of the surprises I'm always confronted with is that as much as we think we know, there's a whole lot we don't know. And particularly going forward with the changes that are happening in the watershed and the population and the climate changes, we really are in the dark as to the future.
Go ahead, Rich.
Sort of a tale of two twin cities, and that is wastewater versus agriculture. Let me take the wastewater piece and then jump over to ag. So on wastewater, I think we've invested over $6 billion upgrading sewage treatment plants from the big ones like Blue Plains to very small package plants way up in Pennsylvania. That load has dropped 40, 50, 60% reductions. Entire rivers have come back because of that.
Population. That's one of the few
Yep.
cases where we've doubled the people and halved the sewage.
Yep.
Or
Exactly,
something like
absolutely,
that. It's pretty amazing.
and that wasn't. I mean, that was figuring out a different financing mechanism each of the states. So the poor communities didn't have to reach into their pockets. Sometimes it got spread out across the entire state. In West Virginia, don't tell anybody, but I helped a state senator write legislation to tap into their lottery money. They upgraded all their treatment plants. Their rivers are running cleaner now. We got smarter about how to permit it. We didn't have lawsuits for each and every one of those 483 plants that eventually got upgraded over there as well. We're getting to the point where actually down in Norfolk, they're injecting their treated sewage back into the groundwater to raise their groundwater table to not only have subsidence but to actually for drinking water. Move on. So we did one of the best jobs in the entire world of upgrading treatment plants because of the technology and getting smart about the politics. You move over to ag, we have blankly screwed up with the economic side, et cetera. Our mechanisms through U.S. Department of Agriculture, even with our state conservation agencies, it's I want to wait until the farmer comes to the table. I want to give him some cost share money, et cetera. Have we gotten better out there? Absolutely. You go on the Eastern Shore, and there are places that look like you just put down green carpeting across there with cover crops across the system as well. Mm-hmm. But there are places that we just haven't gotten smart enough how to maintain it out there, deliver it, and to figure out that farmers are based on a world market out there. So it's the tale of where you put investments, but we haven't gotten close to putting $6 or $7 billion into farming. We can't raise that money like we have for wastewater because we pour concrete better than we do in terms of managing our lands.
To both of you, why didn't we get on the ag thing sooner? I used to have a guy named Leon Billings who was retired near here. He basically wrote with Jorling and a couple other people the Clean Water Act amendments of '72. And he would come over here and he showed me all the background stuff from when Ed Muskie, we're talking in the late 60s, early 70s, put together the modern Clean Water Act. They were very conscious of the need to regulate agriculture. The mechanisms they hoped would do it they were not funded, it was complicated, but they were aware nationally, looking at that.
But the Clean Water Act that came out did not reflect that. The only place in the Clean Water Act that federally you can regulate is what they call confined animal feeding operations. In other words, where it looks like it comes through a pipe. We were still thinking of pipes, we still are now. It's motherhood apple pie. regardless whether at a small town or at the national scale, you don't go after farmers. Not that we're saying you need to go after them, but we have no federal and oftentimes no state or local mechanisms to figure out how to prompt our farmers to not take the bill on themselves, but to figure out how to maintain their herds and their crops and their hayland in a way that in fact is environmentally conscious.
You're
and
right
still
on
the
that,
bottom
but
line.
it still seems to me we were late in even recognizing how large was the contribution. Was it that the sciences of ecology and agriculture were too siloed off, or
Partly,
what?
but also we've changed our farming practices. When we went from a family farm that had 2 cows, a pig, and a dozen chickens to corn and soy that we ship over to the feedlots for the animals, and so that farming's changed, and as a result, we've also reduced the farming footprint. The amount of area that's in active agricultural practice is less than it was 50, 100 years ago. We've intensified that with fertilizer and manure, and we're growing almost 600 million chickens on the eastern shore last year. We hit a record, and that's a fairly recent phenomenon. So, I mean, the growth of chickens is in the last few decades. So when the Bay Program started, we didn't have the chicken issue because we didn't have that many chickens.
And then in our land grant universities, we've got some of the best in the country here, whether it's Penn State, Virginia Tech, et cetera. There's this, at least in my brain, a built-in yin and yang. They're there to support the farmers, to maximize yield, and at the same time, how do you, on the other side, do that? So, for example, we still haven't gone back and re-looked at some of our yield numbers, and you look at the genetics in corn or soybean, they've changed so much. But to go back and say, no, in fact, you don't need to do 110%, you can reduce down to here, and you still have so much efficiency. I mean, you look at corn, it is an extremely inefficient productivity piece. If you're in the private sector, you would have flipped that out and done something differently out there. So there's a whole host of things in there, but at the same time, I've been on farms in each one of these states where that producer, that landowner, she and him working together have figured out how to do it. They're local business people that oftentimes the husband or wife would have another job to keep it going, but I've seen runoff coming some of those farms that I would have been close to drinking water off of. But how do you then replicate that 74,000 times, mainly at very small family farms, spread out across the system? And very different farms, if you're looking at plain sec folks up in Pennsylvania, to folks still working in terms of peanut or cotton farms way down in Southern Virginia. There's completely different approaches to how you make that happen. But we still haven't figured that one out, and that's going to be still a tough nut to crack.
Yeah, one of the things that makes it tough is I think so much of the decision about things like corn, whether we're going to use more for ethanol, 50% of the U.S. corn crop goes into gas tanks in a not very energy saving way. Those decisions really aren't EPA's, the Bay programs, they're made on wider scales, almost global with markets. And I don't know. Could you talk more about that Caesar report? Because I haven't seen it, but from what I've read about it, doesn't it seem to be maybe suggesting we go in some different directions? Well, shallow water habitats.
That's part of it, yeah, and looking for feedbacks and try to understand those tipping points and work toward those.
Is it essentially saying we can't just stop putting all our, just doubling down on reducing the dead zone and hoping it will reduce?
Right.
Where'd that come from?
We got to do things differently. One of the suggestions that we keep worrying about the wording, whether we call it sandbox or piloting, we need to be experimenting on the management scale, large, which is much larger than a scientific experiment that's sort of plot based. It's like, okay, let's try some different things and see what can work. Try some different incentive mechanisms. Take those innovative farmers that are everywhere around the watershed and figure out how to replicate, how to disseminate and spread those lessons, and try a bunch of different approaches to getting at a much more comprehensive view of the bay and the watershed. So, right now we we've got that kind of blinders on. It's all about nutrients. Well, Rich and others did a really interesting exercise on rising temperatures. You know, it's getting hotter, it's getting warmer, measurably warmer since we started measuring it in the bay and in the watershed. Well, all of a sudden you have to think differently about, you want beaver ponds or farm ponds. Well, they're great for retaining nutrients and sediments, but they heat up and they're heaters. What we need are more trees and riparian, more coolers, more management actions that keep the water, groundwater cool and allow these freshwater species in the upland and in the bay itself. So we've got to have a broader view of what we're doing, and if you just myopically look at just nutrients, and then you start making decisions that aren't really smart. The agricultural one I see here, I live on the Eastern Shore, I don't like is that Maryland's got the highest cover crop application in the world, in the country, in the U.S. The amount of farmers that use and get an incentive by planting winter cover crops is really high. But what do they do at the end? They're not allowed to fertilize once they've planted those cover crops. There are some places that do that with a commodity crop where you can be fertilized in the winter. But what do they do at the end of that winter growing season when they're ready to plant their crop? Roundup. So we're trading nutrients for pesticides. That's not holistic. That's myopic, and we've got to be smarter about this. And I think the Caesar's about taking that bigger view, being more creative and adaptive in the management world. And I think it's starting to resonate. People are picking up on this, and I think this is now that the 2025 nutrient diet (TMDL) targets are not being met, we got to rethink a little bit. And I think it's a receptive audience to and I think that's Jerry Schubel's thesis. Let's not try to restore the bay. Let's reimagine the bay for the future. One of the things about population that this doubling of population, people, not only have more people, we consume more. We consume more protein than we used to. The protein of people's diet is increasing globally and in the U.S. We consume more energy, more resources than we all have. More things, more toys, and as a result, it's not just the number of people, but the consumption of that population. So we're going to start looking for sources of food. We're going to be looking at aquaculture. We're going to be looking at that intensified ag footprint being even more productive, because we have to feed ourselves and we have to feed our chickens that we are being shipped off globally. So we've got to be thinking of the future bay and reimagining that in an entirely different way. And I think we're planting the seed in that Caesar report.
Yeah, okay. Population, I actually held a 3-day conference on population, and I didn't get any media there, and I knew a whole bunch of people at the Post and the Sun.
I remember that.
Yeah, at Hood College.
Hood, yeah.
It used to be almost fashionable to talk about stabilizing population back in the 60s and 70s. Now it gets you labeled a racist pretty quick because you get into things like immigration. That's, I have to say, been one of the biggest disappointments in what I consider to have been a fortunate career as an environmental writer, is that I not only haven't convinced anybody much, but I almost, sometimes the Bay journalists don't write anymore about it for a while. It offends some of our donors. So,
But you really got to stop your articles about more beaver population now, buddy.
It's kind of code for population control, Rich. But anyway, yeah. Well, you're right about what you can. But seriously, I don't talk much about population per se anymore. I talk about the fact that it all occurs within the context of an economic mindset that basically says grow. And I think if there's one thing you could find every politician from the mayor of Salisbury to the president of the U.S., Marjorie Taylor Greene to AOC, would be united on. Its growth is good. I think it's bad, so that shows you where I am, in the minority. But I don't know, what do you guys think about that? Can we keep growing forever and expect to have a sustainable Chesapeake? If by sustainable you mean room for all the other critters in it? I mean, what's your opinion?
I admit, I brought my family down here because of the unique resources, the Chesapeake, et cetera, so I was part of the problem.
Yeah.
Only had one kid, so I passed on that piece in there. But, I don't want to, it's a personal choice issue. But I think what we've shown, that you can, in fact, change the human footprint, even in the career that I've had, et cetera. But we're getting to the point, maybe not population-wise, but something like climate change that makes you rethink it. But I still think that there's human ingenuity to reduce that footprint out there. One of the reasons why I've got a little bit of hope, and that is when you start to look at the Chesapeake, and we've moved from, when you look at it from space, it looks big. We've been able to map the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed down to a 1 meter resolution, and understanding, and now we're adding an equal level of understanding of the topography in that system, and understanding where there's small level streams, et cetera. There's so much knowledge and understanding of how we can build on that landscape, use that landscape, protect and conserve that landscape, that I still think we've got some room to do. But at some point, Tom, you're right, and we have a tendency to be right around the Chesapeake itself, or you look on rivers and stuff. It's amazing. You look at the growth between Maryland and Pennsylvania. There's a huge amount of growth right over in the Pennsylvania line of folks that then travel into Maryland for jobs. But it's a tax issue and quality of life, et cetera, that might be there as well. So we humans have a weird way of sort of spreading ourselves out. But I still think, I know we're going to still see that growth in that system. I think you can still do the footprint, but we've got to get smarter about it.
You remind me of another point. Now I'm going to not let you off the hook on population, but this morning there was some really good talk about how all the big land use decisions, which are very important, are at the very local level. It's at the county, township level. But I also see you can't do it. I've seen counties like Montgomery County, Maryland, decides to preserve the rest of its farmland. Good for them. The growth hopped into unprepared Frederick County. Baltimore County does the same to preserve its farmland. Boom, up to Shrewsbury, Pennsylvania, which didn't have a clue and is growing.
You're right.
So while the decisions are local, the planning has to be broader than local. I think it's tough. Just one county or one township doesn't always cut it.
Looking at me? All right.
Or anything else you want
Peter,
to talk
could you
about.
pass these around? I want to talk about our report card because there's some, I think I can illustrate my points with this. So, Rich mentioned the rich monitoring history we have in Chesapeake Bay, the 40 years of water quality monitoring. And so we were able to use those data and come up with an annual Bay report card reporting on dissolved oxygen, water clarity, nitrogen, phosphorus, aquatic plants, chlorophyll, benthic community. So we've been doing this for like 15 years. And not only can we report the grade, but we can report the trajectory. Which way is it going? It's going the right way or the wrong way. So what we see here, when you look at the bay as a whole, overall we're improving. That's good news overall. We're not going as fast as we need to reach our deadlines, but we're going the right direction, except for the eastern shore. The one place in the whole bay or tributaries is here on the eastern shore. It's going the wrong way. In the Chop Tank, in the Chester, what's happening? What's going on? Well, the last 4 or 5 years, we've been starting to measure the watershed. So we've got the streams, the bugs and the fish and the water quality in the streams. We've got societal index, and we have economic indicators. And what do you see when you look at this on the eastern shore? You see what's the red dot? The red spots here. Eastern shore is shining as it's a systematic failure. The people that live on the eastern shore, and I'm one of them, have poor income inequality, housing affordability, jobs growth, and median income. We have poor ability to walk for 10 minutes to find green space. We have heat vulnerability. We have the social index that the CDC produces is negative, and we have bad stewardship scores. And our streams are polluted. So to me, this is a systematic failure of what's going on. It isn't just the Bay and its problems, it's us, it's our communities aren't healthy, our people aren't healthy. The political situation does not help. Yep. Yep. Now the other piece to this I want to highlight is this map we have of the Environmental Justice Index, and we've been working on this for about 5 years. And the CDC, the same group that did the vaccines and everything down in Atlanta, came up with a really interesting technique of comparing social vulnerability, environmental burden, how do you, access to green space, clean water, clean air, et cetera, underlying health vulnerability, underlying asthma and diabetes, et cetera. And what you see when you see this map is severe inequities. We see our urban areas, you see Baltimore, Washington, Richmond, Norfolk. You see those urban areas, but you also see wide swaths of environmental injustices in Appalachia and over here on the Eastern Shore. So, to me, one of the things we've done badly is we haven't brought the whole community with us. The environmental movement's been privileged people, mostly, and not inclusive. And so we've got to change that, and we've got to figure out a way to have the conversations. And we brought Jim Perdue into, here we are in Purdue Hall. We brought Jim Perdue into our student colloquium. And he was very open and honest. He said, I can sell organic chicken, I can sell free-range chicken, I can sell antibiotic-free chicken, and I can make money. I can't sell chickens with the manure issue that you guys, or the nutrient issue. I can't do that. I'll get outpriced by people in North Carolina. When Martin O'Malley started getting onto the chicken problem and approached him, he said, I'll just move to North Carolina. So it has to be equal. It has to be equal playing field nationally. So we got no movement on that front. So we've got to have the conversations, and these are hard conversations because we're talking about quality of life type things, the things that attract us to living on the Eastern Shore. We've got to wrestle with this and have these conversations about, because we're not going to fix the Bay unless we fix ourselves. I mean, that's what I'm hearing here.
What's gonna trigger such conversations? I mean, missing another couple deadlines? I don't know. I mean, that's always the question.
I think, I think missing a very public deadline is going to be part of it. I hope the report card stimulates some conversation. I hope that we start to bring to the fore here that this connectedness, this coupled. We've decoupled our ecology and our environmental education even from the reality of our day-to-day lives. We'll drive our gas-powered cars long distances to have a discussion about climate change. We've got to couple how we live and how that results in.
Yeah, part of the dialogue that we're having with Long Island Sound. So they have a big section of Connecticut and a big section of New York, both New York City and then also the Long Island itself, is connecting the quality and the health of individual coastal communities to the health of Long Island Sound and vice versa. When I came into it, I got a degree, and my master's degree was in environmental toxicology. What I ended up becoming is a behavioral scientist or behavioral management. I mean, I spent 95% of my time, when I'm with Bill, at least 100% of the time, changing human behavior. I used my science degree to do it, but when you had conversations I've had them with thousands of farmers. I've testified on Capitol Hill. I've talked to builders, home builders, and others. It's a matter of connecting with the human side, and I think that's something. That's one of the faults that we had early on. Other than economists, and we just held our nose, sorry guys, and let you in the room. We didn't focus on the social sciences enough. We wanted to understand the hydrology and the hydrodynamics and the biology, etc. It was late to the game of saying we've got to build it in, and it's great, Bill, to see the report card fleshing itself out. It's not just about seagrasses and rockfish and oysters. It's about those other elements. That's, I think, the only way that we're going to make that connection in there.
You know, if I'm not mistaken, Jacques Cousteau, who's come up here a few times today, did come in by teleconference on the 1983, the big conference.
Really?
Yeah, I remember the press was down in some concrete pen in the basement with a loudspeaker taking notes, you know, but he was coming in from Norfolk, I think, where his group
That's
had
where
headquarters.
that's
But he made this nice point about we are very good at instruction, teaching people how to build a bridge, design a car, make a bomb, and that's real important. We often don't distinguish it enough, he said, from education, which is teaching people how to behave. And he said it better than I just have, but it stuck with me all these years.
Well, one of the things I take issue with Jerry's book is characterizing a problem as wicked. Wicked problems are really tough, and there's another way of classifying problems: simple, complicated.
You don't
complex.
think this is tough, huh?
No, I think it's complex,
okay.
but that's different than wicked.
Okay.
A simple problem is you follow a menu, you know, a recipe, and you do a recipe and it's repeatable, easy. You know the result you want, and you know the way to get there. Complicated is building a rocket to the moon. Takes equations, takes math, takes engineers, but you can do it repeatedly, and you know the goal. Complex is raising a kid. There's no guarantee. There's no manual. There's no, well, there's a lot, but you can ignore all that. It's the hardest job you'll ever have, but it's the best job you'll ever have. It's the most rewarding. And so I like the optimism that of solving a complex problem gives you, rather than a wicked problem that just gets too hard and you just walk away. So this is complex. This is because this isn't just about the bay, it's about people. And once you get people, it's complex. People are complex. And I think that's where we have to recognize. That's why this move to social science, that's why embracing social science is so important. I think in getting a more diverse voices into the room is so important. I think we're on the.
Schubel does suggest bringing in sociology.
Yes, he does.
He's been talking to the same people we all talk to. He didn't just generate this out of his fevered brow. So he's a smart guy.
One of the things that he also is I think really spot on is creating this future. Let's reimagine the bay. Let's talk about the bay of the future rather than the bay of the past, and let's not worry about what John Smith saw 400 years ago.
Someone on your panel this morning said, let's not set our goals based on Tom Horton's childhood, not as much as Tom Horton would like, perhaps, but anyway.
Well, they didn't have telephones back then, so we can't go that far back, Tom.
They did, but you had to dial them, Yeah.
No, you had to click the thing. Hello?
So that kind of gets us in. So how would you guys reimagine the bay? I mean, I'll start with something I've thought about is, let's say I want to say take the focus off nutrients and dissolved oxygen, because nothing in this book says stop treating your sewage or stop moving toward renewal. We got to do all that no matter what just to survive, I think. But it occurs to me that we could do a lot more, and we are trying to, with access. I mean, I bicycle in Holland, which has very little nature, but what they've got is connected by just zillions of trails and walkways to horseback, bicycles, walking. Everybody in Holland is connected to going anywhere in the country they can. I mean, we can't do that here, but we've got so much more nature. And some cities, like I was just in Boulder, do that pretty well. Of course, you can't buy a house there for less than $1 million, but that's another problem. But so maybe access is something we ought to be, because that would get into more inclusivity if we chose to focus it on the right neighborhoods and so forth. So I don't know. But what that, sky's the limit. What's your reimagining?
I'd love to take the dirt that we dredge every year and apply it to the salt marshes that are drowning. Right now, we make Poplar Island, we make Masonville Cove, but I think Blackwater desperately needs more sediments. And to me, this group has too much dirt. This group doesn't have enough. It's kind of obvious to me what needs to happen. Now, the problem is it's a little more expensive to do that than do it here. But I think we gotta do that. And I think we've got to. I love this growth in aquaculture because it's like the growth of one of my favorite things to do is drink beer and eat oysters, and the growth of these microbreweries and the energy of the young people that are starting that, the same as the aquaculture group. I think that's a fantastic synergy, and getting that really ramping that up. I think getting some creativity. I love the engineering, the urban engineering for bioswales and pervious pavers and green roofs and all that. It's pretty exciting stuff. I think we need to get that innovation and into the farms, into the agricultural as well, because right now we're so prescriptive. Thou shalt plant cover crops by October 1st, and for the full. Well, weather and crop cycles change that. Let's be outcome focused, and that's one of the Caesar reports. Final. Let's not reward or let's not focus our restoration efforts on activity, like implementation of a best management practice. Let's be outcome based. Let's see how
Is that the report? Yeah, we got to get better with farming, and some of it's not under our control, but whatever is that the report that says if you didn't do any more than we're doing right now to reduce the nutrients from farms, to get to our goals with ag, we'd have to take 44% of it out of production?
I think so. I'm not sure if I believe that, but I think a couple things we need to
reimagine. And that's
reimagine.
assuming we made no more progress.
Right. Absolutely. I think we need to reimagine the ag. I think we need to use the tools and the understanding. To me, again, when you can look at a watershed at a meter resolution and high resolution topography, you look at whether it's a farm or a city street or a county in terms of the loss of open space or forest land, completely different. On the ag sector, our current system, you can pour more money into it, but it's not going to change basically what happens on the ground. We've got to change the economics of delivering that, where they do it. I mean, you look at a particular farm, if you put a riparian forest buffer here versus here, you could be treating 20 acres of upland or a half acre of upland. Yeah. We don't do that. We don't deliver at that particular scale.
Smart enough.
We don't get smart enough, and there are ways to do that. When we look at, that we've got the 30 by 30% of the watershed protected by 2030, but we've been challenged to say you need to at least save 50% of it. We've got to get smart about conservation of it. We've got to get smarter about how that influences neighborhoods, how it influences indigenous peoples. We got to figure out how to think open space is not just these wide open things way over in the Shenandoahs, but it's in our backyards of our neighborhoods and our counties, et cetera. But there is land out there. There's a tremendous amount of landowners that are getting to the point where that they want to invest in it and have a permanency out there. So I think if we look at it more traditionally, you're right, we're going to fail. But I think the tools and the understanding that we've gotten and the fact that what scares me, and we don't have time to show, but if you look at the Chesapeake Bay tidal tributaries and the main stem itself, you look at the trends of warming temperatures over the last 30 years, every single station of 161 are showing a tremendous amount of upward 1 to 2 to 3 degrees Celsius in the last 30 to 40 years. I mean, that is just incredible in terms of that system is changing to that particular level.
Well, that's a good
so if
point,
we don't have the understanding and the motivation to change it, I'm not sure what the heck we're going to do.
That's a good point, because we're 40 years out on this restoration with something to show for it, but I don't think we can just do another 40 years and have a little bit
Absolutely
more to show
not.
for it. You don't.
We're smarter than that. We've got an understanding of it, but we've got to change. And I think the Caesar report actually has been picked up by other colleagues around the country. In some of the places I'm working in, both Puget Sound and Long Island Sound, they've already referenced it. But unfortunately, they don't have the same. Well, fortunate for us, we had the depth and the ability and the knowledge to go ahead and take a look at it and be very self-critical about what we've got going on out there. But, cheers to the Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee for doing that, but having the breadth of information to understand what you should and shouldn't do out there as well.
I'm
On
thinking, go ahead.
Wednesday at noon, this coming Wednesday, there's the Chesapeake Research Consortium runs a monthly webinar, and this Wednesday's webinar is on the Caesar report, and it's free, and you can sign up. And if you miss it, you can watch it later if you've signed up, if you've
But,
registered.
you guys are also on NFL football. Isn't that Caesar thing where you can parlay different things out there? That's a good way to raise
Different
some
season,
money.
different season.
Yeah. You want to throw it open to the audience?
Yes.
People, yeah, Fulbert.
So it's interesting. Everybody has a life story. I start writing my autobiography next year when I'm on sabbatical. I worked for Louisiana DEQ. What you show here is the whole of Louisiana would be what you're showing there as that little corner. I worked for Louisiana DEQ non-point source program. First thing I was told when I came in, I was with my uniform. They told me, here's your uniform, you'll never put it on. Number two, when you go to the field, you'll go in unmarked cars because the people in Acadiana are hostile to
Okay.
the government, and we are the government.
Right.
So that's first who we were dealing with. Secondly, inside the DEQ, who I was dealing with, all the people who were supposed to be modeling the water quality issues, none of them had training. They were civil engineers who had zero training in agriculture, biology, biochemistry, farming, agriculture, anything. So I was brought in as that whiz kid who is gonna change everything. It took me a year working. I looked at their model. Their model was looking in water. It was not looking at the stuff on land. And it said 5% is due to what's going on here. 95% is due to unknown factors. I asked them, this is the model? Yeah, this is the model. We don't know 95% of what's causing this thing. So I sat down and worked on my report, reworked how things had to be done. When I finished, I was called over by my boss to the next boss, called me and said, yeah, Fulbert, is this what you say? Yeah. He said, you know how many careers you're threatening in Louisiana DEQ? You are really talking about 80% of the people here losing jobs and all the work we've done for the last 20 years amounting to nothing. I said, I stand by what I write. Then he told me, for that matter, you better consider getting another career. I said, that's a good thought. So I walked out, I put on my uniform, I took a picture. On Monday, I reported to Southern University as an assistant professor. And what is the problem in Louisiana is what is the problem with what you're talking here. People don't want to change. They've got the wrong model. They don't want to know what's going on land. They don't want to know what's going on in agriculture. So that was problem number one. Something for you to think about before I bore you with my story. Anyway, I walked out of DQ. Before I bore you with my story, one thing of the phosphate issues here in Delmarva, the old chicken houses produce phosphate. That phosphate, you just can't mop it up. One possibility, if you grow medical marijuana, it can mop up the phosphate. Whether that can be considered, I don't know if you are in a mindset. I don't know whether the Chesapeake program is in a mindset, and Maryland Department of Environmental Quality is in a mindset. I too have a conservative background like a lot of people, but it's time to rethink.
I know UMES has been looking for some time for crops that would be especially good at scavenging excess phosphorus. I don't know whether they've, I guess we'd hear about it if they found a miracle plant. But, yeah, James, you had a question.
Yeah, could you give me a guesstimate, shoreline total, bay, shoreline total, watershed? And number three, how do we define watershed, and what is the threshold that we say a mile away is where the watershed ends versus a mile away we're going to say the watershed?
So the length of the shoreline of the Chesapeake's over 10,000 miles.
10,000 miles.
Yeah, I can give you the exact, in terms of the watershed itself, not the outer boundary, I don't know that, but over 64,000 square miles. That's the 6 states in the District of Columbia.
64
Yeah.
and
And then the difference is essentially think of a water droplet hitting it on the top. Does it go this way or that way? That's where the watershed ends.
So we
That's where
count
it begins.
every bit.
Cooperstown, New York, the Baseball Hall of Fame, there's a little sign up
Yeah,
there now
yeah.
that says this
So
is
it's
where
just
the
topography.
Chesapeake
It's
begins,
topography,
yeah.
yep.
Gravity.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yep.
yeah, it's a big, yeah, Mark.
Yeah, maybe then, maybe it's a little bit of a segue. I was gonna ask this question of somebody, some minds that might know. I've been here all day and I haven't heard anybody, even maybe always, make any comment about what they think the Supreme Court's decision may to greatly reduce the power of government in general, federal government, to control discharge into parts of the watershed. Yes, what?
But basically scaling way back on wetlands protections, yeah,
Scale
yeah,
back on wetlands and
yeah.
therefore that's right.
Yeah.
You can do.
yeah.
I mean, the big picture I know is it isn't gonna be good.
Yeah.
Unless you're a developer, it's not gonna be good, I'll lay with that. But I mean, if you just given, Rich, especially your experience, and I'm sure Bill does too, I mean, just, can you put that in context of other threats and how much bigger, what do you?
Yeah, actually, I think it's got a tremendous influence. A lot of our states have always said, I'm going to go up to what the feds ask for, and I'm not going to go beyond them. Maryland, different, but usually it's like, okay, that's the ceiling, and if they're going to lower the ceiling, then I'm going to lower what I'm doing. Nothing in the federal government prevents a state from going beyond that, from a Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, wetland protection. But most of them are saying, I'm going to stay up there and then argue against the feds. So you're right. The connectivity of bodies of water out there and stuff like that it's got to be superficial versus from a ground perspective. I think, Mark, it's a huge step in the wrong direction. And I think it's going to reverberate there, and people are going to use that to set a different set of precedents, not just in terms of wetlands, but in terms of water quality and the need to protect it, and what people can do on my land versus your land.
Right, I mean, I don't think, right, the states could do that and keep that in place, but if they don't formally, then I think it's gonna be a rare local government, which is where land use
Yeah.
changes happen.
Oh, absolutely.
Where that permit is, couldn't build a 500 home neighborhood there before, but the local government.
Well, it's a sort of the playoff of what we talked about ag without the federal statute, the Clean Water Act actually dealing effectively with ag. States didn't have to push to, they had to crawl into that space themselves and doing it. Even more progressive states have been slow to do that, or they put something in, but they don't reinforce it or enforce it overall.
The other, we talked about Clean Water Act and the sewage upgrades, but we haven't touched on the Clean Air Act and the fact that we have catalytic converters and smokestack scrubbers, and our nutrients, nitrogen that comes down via rain is significantly reduced, or headwater streams are improving as a result of the Clean Air Act.
And basically about a third of the nitrogen comes from dirty air. And it's not just dirty air, it's what that air falls on. If it falls on an old growth forest, the runoff's not as bad as if it falls on a parking lot out here at Walmart.
Absolutely.
So it's a dual thing, but yes,
Well, you're speaking to a room full of environmental professionals and, qualitative researchers who focus on the historical components also with the Chesapeake Bay. So I was wondering if you had any suggestions for this particular audience and ways in which we can professionally develop ourselves to handle these problems for the future. It seems like a couple people brought up increasing your agricultural literacy. So I don't know if that's something you agree with or not, or if there's any other perspectives.
Well, I'm thinking our food systems, not just ag, but our food systems are really critical to climate, water, nutrients. I think this is the future, and how we eat and what we eat, what we choose to eat. A few years ago at one of the conferences, they said a carnivore driving a Hummer Prius has a bigger ecological footprint than a vegetarian driving a Hummer. That's that kind of. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that was the little thing they said. But the point about that is that the food, we lose a lot of nutrients on the fields that don't end up in the crops. But much more concerning to me is that we lose food on every step until it gets to the table. And so it's less than half of what gets grown gets eaten. So we lose that, and that's silly and stupid. But so I think it's not just agricultural literacy, it's about where's your food come from and what we can do to get better farm to table kind of agricultural systems. I think that's something that, I think the other thing is the climate, the hidden benefit of decarbonizing is going to be reducing nutrients. So if we decarbonize ourselves, less fossil fuel burning, we'll be better off with nutrients as well. So anything, EV cars and solar panels, all that stuff is gonna benefit.
On quite another tack, to answer your question, Walter Boynton brought up Mary Ellen, his wife's work in mediation. My daughter's trained in that too, and she told me, enlightened me long ago, that the problems people come to mediation with, they're insoluble. I mean, they may be enmities and problems that are so complex they go back. But if they feel they've been heard, that finally somebody's listened to their story, it's like a win. You're not going to solve most of the problems that you get. And I think that's a hard thing to do, time consuming, but nothing pisses people off more if they think they haven't been heard. And a lot of them, once they have been heard or feel like they've been heard, they can live with you not answering all their whims. I've heard watermen talk about that. If they've feel like a regulator's heard them, doesn't always work, but they can live with the results. They don't expect miracles. So there's things outside of environmental science that could play into being a better environmental professional, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, two things I certainly learned. First is take your shoes off and step into their shoes and listen first. Don't tell them what to do. I never told, that's EPA motto. Let me come in and tell you what to do. Hell no, folks. And the other thing is, what these guys emphasize in the morning, tell the story. Mm-hmm. For every single audience you're talking to, whether it's congressmen or your neighbors, etc., and tailor that story to them as well. Between those two things, you can get a long, long ways. And I found through thousands and thousands of meetings and sit down with folks, etc., that you could always find something in common with somebody else out there and find that string, and usually connected to clean water or kids or something, and then build off of that. You're going to find a whole bunch of things you're never going to agree to, but find that thread that you can do. And also the third thing, particularly when you're dealing with others that are taking that burden on, if people come to a session, a meeting, et cetera, and they come away with something that helped them do their job, or they could show to their bosses, or they could show a success, amen. If you can do that, then all of a sudden you've got a partner to work with, et cetera. So if you look through my almost 3,000 contacts and stuff like that, it's a diversity of people out there in terms of who I work with, et cetera. And go out and give a sociologist or a psychiatrist, whatever, a hug, because you're going to need some of that social aspects out there, and think behavior change. That's essentially what we're in there for. Regardless of what our background is, we're trying to convince people to do something, to think a little bit differently.
What do you guys think of Schubel's suggestion? And I'm not sure he's the first one to make it, that we would do well to bring in a group of experts parallel to the Bay Program who know their stuff, their science, but they have no Chesapeake Bay expertise affiliation and no baggage, like all of us do have baggage, because we've been here all our lives. But you think, I don't know how that would work politically. He says they wouldn't have literal authority, but assuming you could do that, would that do any good?
I've often thought that scientists are really good at exchanging. We go to conferences and write journals, and that each and we read, and we're always talking with our colleagues around the country, around the world. I think the resource management community, Rich is an exception, but most of them don't get out. They don't, and they can't. I mean, the state won't fund you to go to an international conference, and so I think that's the loss. That would, I think, enhance. And so I think what Jerry's calling for is really useful, to have that community of practice, learn from others, and look at. I mean, the Germans and the Baltic folks are pretty far ahead of us on some respects. I mean, their nutrient reduction stuff is very impressive. I mean, it's kind of gross, but they separate urine from feces, and so they treat, because it turns out urine's pretty safe stuff. It's got a lot of nutrients. That's where the nutrients are. The bad stuff, the stuff that makes you sick, is in the solids. So you separate those out, and they take these giant bags of urine out to the fields. I mean, it's crazy, but I mean that's the kind of stuff they're working on. They're way advanced in that.
Tom, from my experience, and particularly when I go to another system, et cetera, I don't understand the politics, the culture, et cetera. So, but you do bring, at least I try to bring, here's what a successful partnership, whether small, different, big, whatever. Here's the personality, the characteristics of what worked there. I don't think bringing in an outside group to do it because they give that and then they walk away. I think we've got to solve our own problems. I've actually got a meeting Monday morning with a small group of folks outside of the usual Chesapeake Bay Program circles, but are trying to figure out, what do we look beyond 2025? The suggestion that I'm coming to them is get a small group, but of folks that have been in the system and maybe too long in the system, but have watched what we've done right and wrong.
Yeah.
But then get an equal number of, I'll call it younger folks that have different ideas. Bring the two worlds together and challenge them to think differently about how you move from here. So you learn from that history and that understanding of it, but you also bring a new and young, well, I hate to say younger, but a different perspective and a different mentality, and see where you merge the two together to then look at life beyond that. So I don't think we can get a little bit of external. I don't think that's going to help us. I think we've got to draw from ourselves, but I think we've got to bring a different mix together than we've done in the past.
I accuse Jerry of, he's an oceanographer. They tend to be kind of more physicists. They're more comfortable with technological solutions and engineering than I am personally. And I said, you're kind of gaga about geoengineering. He says, what the hell do you think climate change is? You've been geoengineering the world in the wrong direction. So I had to admit he had a point. But let me finish up. We talked a little bit about optimism, pessimism, hope. You guys got any thoughts on that? I get asked that all the time. Are you optimistic about the Bay?
I'm coming at it as seeing the power of positive ecological feedbacks, like the Susquehanna Flats example, but there are a bunch of other ones out there.
That is a marvel.
It's a marvel.
Yeah.
That if you can, there are tipping points. There are ecological tipping points. There's societal tipping points. There's a societal tipping point about tobacco. It's not cool anymore to smoke. So I'm holding out for tipping points. Tipping point on our food systems. Tipping point on our acceptance of pesticides in agriculture, and I think the ecological evidence is, if you nudge things the right way, you get these positive feedbacks coming along, and it starts to heal itself. So I see my hope is in moving towards societal and then next environmental tipping points.
I think, not trying to sound too self-congratulatory, but the opportunity to have gone around a lot of the country and around the world, that I don't see another system. There's certainly some in Europe, but they're more social government driven out there, that's been able to do what we've been doing over there. Such a large bay system or a watershed with the amount of human population in there. So part of me, I'm a glass half full. Otherwise, I wouldn't work my entire career doing what we've done here and seeing the responses. But that we've got to help the rest of the world write that next chapter. And I think if we can't do it, I don't know who the heck can, given the amount of science and understanding and the discipline to do it. But I think what I'm concerned about is the leadership. I don't see it, and maybe I've been out of I don't see the both at not just the state scale or the federal scale, but just built into the whole system of who's going to pick up the pieces and move to the next one. If we can do that, and we understand that it's got to be more watershed driven and it's got to be more social ocean, I think we can take it. And we got to rethink the goals. I think that point, I hadn't even thought about it. We've always looked in the past. You got to look in the future and what all the different forcing factors are and account for them and get, suck it up and say, we're not going to get there, but we can get somewhere else.
You know, years ago, I was hiking in the Harvard Research Forest with a guy, David Foster, who was head of it. And I was bitching and whining, and he stopped and he drew a graph in the dirt like that. This was New England forests, 90-some% in the 1600s. This was New England forests when they were 20% back in the 1800s. This was today's New England forests, covering about 75% of New England. Then he drew a little line down in the bottom, the nadir of forests. So that's the entire lifespan of Thoreau, who spent his life, like you, smart writer, but bitching and whining about there were no forests, not enough for a muskrat, he said. And Thoreau, like even the brightest, he knew now and he knew the past, but he couldn't see the future. And that didn't mean everything's fine with New England forests, but I think he was telling me in a gentle way to shut up.
Stop whining.
Yeah, stop whining.
Did you take the advice? I didn't think so. Another mark for Beaver.
But Thoreau only lived to be 44, so
Yeah.
you've got more.
Well, Thoreau actually coined the term succession. He was beginning to see abandoned farms come back to forest. He didn't quite knew where it would go. Nobody did, of course. So, yeah.
I mean, just from the presentations this morning, that gives me hope in terms of the thinking when he and I went to grad school.
Well,
We
see,
weren't
hope
talking about
is
that
a
type
whole,
of stuff.
hope's a different word. It comes from Middle English or Old English, hop, same root. It's optimism means feeling good. Yeah, I'm not feeling good about the bay. You'd be a fool to be feeling good about it. But you can be pessimistic and hopeful. Hopeful means you can see some ways out.
Absolutely.
And once you lose hope, you better change jobs, but or something. But I think it's possible to be hopefully pessimistic or pessimistically hopeful. I don't know. I'd like to think so.
I hope so.
So, a question for you, if I'll use striped bass. Striped bass go back down now. We're losing striped bass.
Yeah.
But in the hotter, warmer bays, keeps going. But up here, we're fishing cobia bay instead. Is that?
Well,
We're fishing redfish,
You know, I
actually,
think
more now.
realistically,
Blue
I
catfish.
think realistically, striped bass are going to be migrating north. Probably the Hudson population will grow a bit, and there never will be another Chesapeake Bay north of us, but they may not be the species that they were.
I think it's been against what Jerry's saying, because they will not be the species.
Yeah, they won't. They won't. Crabs might do better. Who knows?
They're being driven in
Yeah.
large part by something that we don't control.
Yeah.
But redfish,
Mhm.
and I mean, but I don't know, it'll take long past our lifetime, but black mangroves, maybe someday.
Yeah, you could do worse. They make good firewood too. I did some kayaking down the Everglades. So, you know, just ones that are dead I cut up, not the live ones. Anyway, yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you guys.